The air inside the courtroom was heavy, thick enough that every breath seemed borrowed from someone else's lungs. Benches creaked under the weight of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, strangers leaning too close, the static of whispers floating like dust above their heads. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly, mingling with the faint buzz of anticipation. Even the scent in the room, stale coffee, cologne too sharp for the small space, polished wood warmed under too many bodies, carried its own tension. It was the kind of atmosphere where people forgot about clocks. They were waiting for a show. And then he spoke. The man who had just walked in, mid-50s, skin stretched taut from years of expensive living, suit pressed into perfection, didn't wait to be acknowledged. His voice broke across the silence before anyone had even shifted in their seats. "Oh, wonderful," he said, his tone dripping with a theatrical boredom. "So this is where my morning goes, wasted in a room made for television entertainment. A circus dressed as justice." He flicked his wrist, the glint of a heavy gold watch catching the overhead light. "This place decides nothing. Let's not pretend. I could buy everyone in here, every last one of you, ma'am included, if I cared enough to bother." For a heartbeat, the entire room stopped breathing. No cough, no shuffle, no nervous throat clearing. Nothing. Just the faintest hum of electricity overhead, as if even the lights leaned in to hear what would happen next. From the back row, someone coughed, a dry, awkward sound that echoed in the silence like a gun misfiring. And then came the low ripple, a murmur rolling through the benches like a tide. "Did he just?" a woman whispered, hand half covering her mouth. "He said it." Out loud, another voice answered. A young man in the second row turned to his neighbor and shook his head in disbelief. "Is he serious? He really just said that?" The wealthy man didn't even flinch at the reaction. He leaned back, shoulders relaxed, lips curved into the kind of smile people wear when they've already won in their own minds. His fingers tapped against the armrest like a metronome, unbothered by the collective outrage pressing in on him. Across the room, she sat without moving. Her posture was exact, neither rigid nor slack, the kind of stillness that draws every eye without asking for it. Her face revealed nothing, no flicker of irritation, no indulgence of his arrogance. Only her eyes shifted, cold and precise, fixing on him as though he'd just drawn a weapon and pointed it at her. When she spoke, her voice was low, stripped of theatrics, but every syllable carried. Even those at the back, straining to catch the words, felt the quiet steel in them. "Sir," she said, unblinking, "money buys many things. But respect and truth, never." It wasn't a loud statement. It wasn't a performance. Yet the weight of it struck harder than any raised voice could. The room seemed to fold inward, the walls themselves listening. The buzzing whispers froze. Somewhere in the middle row, a man let out a soft whistle before catching himself, as if the sound might earn him trouble. The wealthy man's smirk faltered for the briefest second, the line of his mouth tightening almost imperceptibly. But arrogance was his armor, and he wore it back into place quickly, shaking his head as if the remark was beneath his notice. Still, the pause had been there, undeniable, and the room had seen it. For the audience packed inside those four walls, the moment landed like the opening bell of a fight. They weren't here for paperwork or legal phrasing, they wanted blood in the form of words, and now they could smell it. They leaned forward, phones ready in some hands though no one dared hold them up just yet. Eyes darted between the two figures at the center, one radiating indifference gilded by wealth, the other silent but dangerous, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this arrogance to expose itself. The silence stretched thin, taut as wire. Everyone waited for what would come next. The wealthy man tapped his watch once more, a gesture that felt less casual now, almost defensive. She didn't look at the gold. She didn't look away. He had stepped squarely on the minefield without realizing it. And the air, thick and still only minutes earlier, now vibrated with the collective knowledge that the explosion hadn't even started yet. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The man's smirk returned, broader now, as if her words had only fueled his confidence rather than cracked it. He spread his arms along the back of his chair, posture loose, every movement meant to broadcast control. When he spoke again, it was louder, pitched not just for her but for the crowd pressed into the room. "You see," he began, a theatrical lilt in his voice, "this entire spectacle exists because a former associate of mine, a man who wouldn't know opportunity if it bit him, decided to cry foul. He drags me here, hoping a courtroom will give him what his own ambition never could. Pennies, ladies and gentlemen. He's chasing scraps from a man who lives on millions." The words hung there, sharp enough to sting. A wave of uneasy laughter rippled across a corner of the gallery, quickly dying when it failed to find approval. Most listeners stayed silent, their eyes fixed on him, waiting to see if arrogance could carry him past the edge he'd stepped onto. He leaned forward suddenly, elbow resting on his knee, voice dropping into a confidential tone, though loud enough for everyone to hear. "I invested more into that project than he'll ever see in his lifetime. That's fact. And now he's parading around, pretending I owe him something. That's comedy. Pure comedy." As if to punctuate his disdain, he checked his watch again, this time exaggerated, tilting his wrist until the light caught the face of it. He sighed, as though the ticking seconds of his day were infinitely more valuable than anything happening within these walls. She didn't move. Not a twitch. But her stillness pressed harder against his performance than any visible reaction could. Her gaze stayed on him, unblinking, the kind of attention that strips a man's gestures of their charm. "Do you have the documents you've chosen to rely on?" she asked, her voice cutting into the theatrics like the edge of a blade. He gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Documents?" He reached down, lifted a leather briefcase, and with a careless flick of his wrist dropped a thick binder onto the desk. The sound cracked through the silence, pages shifting under the weight. "There. Paperwork to keep you busy, though I assure you it's all just formality. Looking through that, waste of your time, waste of mine." His words lingered like smoke, taunting, daring her to admit she couldn't touch him. She didn't answer. She only pulled the binder closer, opening it without haste. A single page turned, then another. The silence changed shape, no longer anticipation but something more electric, dangerous. Every eye in the gallery locked on her hands, listening to the faint scrape of paper, the shuffle of her fingertips along the edge of each sheet. No one coughed this time. No one whispered. The sound of turning pages filled the room like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. He reclined again, lips curved in satisfaction, fingers drumming against the polished wood. To him, it was already over. To the crowd, it was the waiting before the storm. When she finally raised her head, the hush in the room deepened. Her eyes met his, steady, sharp. Her words were soft, yet every person in the chamber felt the weight of them. "In your own reports, Mr. Langford, there is a transaction left unaccounted for. 3 days prior to what you've labeled your final settlement. Did you forget that entry, or did you imagine no one would notice?" It was as if the floor shifted beneath the room. Gasps and murmurs crashed into the silence, people jolting upright in their seats. A man in the back raised his phone instinctively, then lowered it when he realized the guard's eyes were on him. Voices tangled together. She caught him. "Wait, what did she say? 3 days before. He didn't mention that." The wealthy man chuckled, but the sound carried an edge now, a tremor masked with bravado. "You don't understand business," he said, the words sharp but less certain. "That was an advance payment. A routine transfer. Not a debt." His tone tried to carry indifference, but a subtle shift betrayed him, the brief hesitation before the explanation, the quick swallow that caught his throat. The gallery reacted again, some nodding as though convinced, others shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman whispered, "Listen to his voice. He's rattled." But the silence that followed didn't belong to the crowd. It belonged to her. She hadn't looked away once. The binder sat closed now, her hand resting on it as if to say the evidence could speak for itself. She didn't press further, not yet. The tension tightened, the air nearly humming with it. The man sat back, forcing another smile, but it clung to him awkwardly now, like a suit one size too small. Every eye in the room knew it, his armor had cracked. She leaned forward just enough for the microphone to catch the faintest pull of air before her words. No rush, no flourish, only a deliberate weight that made the room bend toward her. An advance, you said, she murmured, each syllable placed with surgical care. That's curious. Because your partner has a copy of the agreement where that line is not marked as an advance. It says, very clearly, final payment. The words cracked through the silence like glass under pressure. For a heartbeat no one reacted, and then the ripples began. Heads tilted, eyebrows shot upward, and a wave of whispers uncoiled from the benches. Did she just say final? Someone hissed. That changes everything, came another, lower but urgent. The man's jaw tightened, his smile stiffening into something unnatural. He stared at her as though the phrase itself were indecent. He shifted in his chair, subtly angling his body, as if posture alone could deny the claim. That document, he said, voice coated in disdain, is fraudulent. It's a trick. Fabricated by desperate men trying to claw at my success. I don't waste time answering to fictions. He delivered it with the polish of someone used to crushing disputes by sheer authority. But there was the smallest crack, his throat working harder on the swallow, his hand tightening against the leather armrest before relaxing too quickly. She didn't flinch. She didn't even acknowledge the performance. Her eyes stayed locked on his, her tone calm, detached. What makes it less curious, she continued, is that the signature on that agreement belongs to your attorney. The notary's seal is recorded and valid. The ledger entry coincides with the day you wired the amount. Stamps and seals, Mr. Langford, are not forged with ease. The room reacted like a living thing. Breathless laughter escaped one corner before dissolving into murmurs. Someone cursed softly under their breath. A woman pressed her hand over her mouth, as though stifling a scream. It wasn't noise so much as pressure building inside the walls, an audience trapped between disbelief and hunger for what came next. He cleared his throat, louder than he meant to. You're mistaken, he said sharply. I don't know what you think you're reading, but... Her hand lifted, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to cut him off without a single word. We'll get to your interpretation, she said. For the record, the notary was active, the attorney still licensed, and the margin notes match counsel's handwriting. Paper speaks before we do. It speaks before you do. A rustle of approval moved through the benches. He adjusted his cuff, the gold watch gleaming brighter than before, though it looked less like a trophy now and more like armor catching light. He glanced toward the crowd, gauging their reaction, and what he saw there unsettled him, not awe, not fear, curiosity. They wanted more. Let's assume, for argument, he snapped, that it says what you claim. Even then, it's irrelevant. Context changes words. Business is fluid. Fluidity, she answered, does not rewrite signatures. It does not backdate stamps. And it does not carve your attorney's initials into the margin. Her eyes held his without blinking. But let's relieve your burden. We will not rely on documents alone. The line changed the air. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, hundreds of bodies moving together. Anticipation prickled the skin of the room like static. For the first time that morning, his face lost color, not enough for the cameras, but enough for the front rows to catch. His tongue flicked across dry lips. He masked it quickly, but the moment had already passed through the audience like a current. The silence sharpened. She closed the binder carefully, squared its edges against the desk, then set her palm atop it. Her stillness carried more threat than raised voices ever could. We will call someone who observed the signing, she said. Someone who was present when you discussed the timing of the final payment. A chair scraped in the gallery. No one dared cough. The wealthy man's laugh came out too quickly, brittle as breaking twigs. A plant, he scoffed, waving a hand. Of course. An actor dragged in from the street, pretending memory counts for more than business law. Memory alone is fragile, she replied, her voice steady. But memory supported by record is difficult to erase. And this testimony is supported, by the wire confirmation, the bank's timestamp, and the notary's log. The crowd shifted, a single organism breathing unevenly. Some leaned so far forward their knees pressed the wooden railing. A woman clutched the strap of her purse until her knuckles whitened. They were no longer watching, they were participating, caught in the rhythm of revelation. He reclined suddenly, forcing a smirk back into place, but his shoulders betrayed him, too stiff, too quick. "Do your worst," he said. The words came out thin. Outside the tall windows, clouds dragged across the sky, blotting and reshaping themselves as if mirroring the trial inside. A chill draft slipped through the open rear doors, bringing the damp smell of asphalt and rain. It curled low across the floor, tugging at pant cuffs and skirts, a ghost of the world outside reminding everyone that time hadn't stopped, though it felt like it had. Her chin lifted a fraction. "Bring them in." The rear doors opened. Heads turned in unison, necks craning for a first glimpse. Footsteps sounded, slow, steady, weighted with purpose. The outline appeared, a coat folded over one arm, a leather folio in the other hand. They paused in the doorway, scanning the room with calm eyes. His face shifted. Not panic, something worse. Recognition. The color drained from his cheeks just enough for the nearest rose to murmur. He adjusted in his chair, an unconscious movement, as though trying to make space he hadn't intended to give. The witness stepped into the room fully. Their gait was measured, not hurried, each step deliberate. A pale scar traced from temple to hairline, subtle but undeniable once seen. Their hand rose to take the oath. The voice was clear, firm. When the word truth left their lips, the silence was absolute. Even the light seemed to dim. Eyes met, hers, then his. The look wasn't anger, not greeting, not threat. It was recognition, old and undeniable, the kind that drags a man back to a specific table, a pen scratching across paper, a decision made in confidence he thought buried. She opened the binder again, one page turned with a fingertip resting on the initials. "State your name for the record." The name was given. The reaction rippled instantly, gasps, mutters, one sharp intake of breath so loud it carried to the front. He blinked twice, then froze completely, statue still. "And tell us," she said, voice precise as a scalpel, "where you were at 4:17 p.m. on the day this seal was stamped." The witness began to answer, 3 plain words, steady, unshaken, when the rear door opened again with a muted click. Every head turned. A second figure stood silhouetted in the frame, still and watchful. For the first time all morning, his hand did not touch the watch. It clamped down on the armrest instead, knuckles whitening as he stared toward the doorway. The atmosphere sharpened the instant the witness crossed the threshold. Conversations died mid-whisper, as if the very presence of the bookkeeper had turned air into glass. People leaned closer without meaning to, their bodies pulled by the gravity of the moment. He wasn't flashy, not the kind of figure that usually drew attention. Gray suit, steady stride, a leather folio tucked under his arm. But everyone recognized the type, someone who lived inside numbers. And numbers rarely lied. He placed the folio on the stand, adjusted his cuff once, and raised his hand for the oath. His voice was measured, almost quiet, yet it carried cleanly through the room. Afterward, he sat, both palms resting flat as if bracing against a storm. "State your role," she said. "I'm the senior accountant for Langford and Hale," he answered, his gaze steady. "I handle reconciliations, ledgers, vendor payments. I keep track of the paper trail. Simple. Factual." The crowd shifted, intrigued despite themselves. "Were you present at the signing of the contract in question?" she asked. "I was," he said. No hesitation. "Tell us what you heard." He opened the folio, lifted a marked page, then looked up again. "I was in the conference room when the agreement was executed. Mr. Langford reviewed the clause on the final payment and said, his voice remained clear, each word distinct, "I'll record the final payment later, so no one notices." The effect was immediate. A collective gasp shot through the gallery, followed by nervous laughter, mutters, even a stifled cheer from the back row. "He's ready," someone in the front whispered, almost gleeful. Phones lifted instinctively, then dropped again when the bailiff's stare swept the benches. The sound in the room was no longer silence but a living, surging thing. Langford exploded. He shot to his feet so quickly his chair screeched across the floor. His face burned crimson, jaw clenched, veins visible at his temple. "Fuck you," he shouted at the witness, his voice cracking with rage. "You're nobody. They bought you to stand here and lie." The words ricocheted off the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot. A woman in the second row flinched, clutching her purse. Someone shouted, "Oh my God," and the room broke into chaos, murmurs, gasps, the restless shifting of dozens of bodies. The bailiff barked for order, voice hard, commanding, and slowly the uproar shrank back into uneasy quiet. The accountant didn't move. He simply sat, hands folded now, gaze steady as a metronome. She remained still as well, unmoved by the storm. Her voice, when it came, was colder than his fury. "Now," she said, level and sharp, "everyone can see what a person looks like when the arguments have run out." The silence that followed was heavier than the outburst. No coughs, no shifting. Only the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the uneven sound of Langford's breathing. He dropped back into his chair, fumbling with his cuff, flashing the gold watch as if it could restore his balance. It didn't. She turned back to the witness. "Mr. Hale, you heard those words clearly?" "I did." "Who else was present?" "The notary, Mr. Langford's counsel, and Ms. Patel from vendor management." The door was open. Staff passed by. "Did you make a note at the time?" "Yes. A reconciliation memo, time-stamped on our drive. I highlighted the phrase because final payment changes liability." He lifted a flagged sheet. His tone was calm, precise, the language of someone who lived by decimals. Langford tried again. "You hated me. I cut your bonus. You're bitter." "I disagreed with the decision," the accountant said, unflinching. "But numbers don't change with feelings." The gallery laughed, quick and nervous, before the bailiff silenced them with a glance. Someone whispered, "That's the nail." "Mr. Hale," she asked, "did the notary's log confirm the time?" "Yes. 4:17 p.m. matches the wire timestamp." Her gaze shifted back to Langford. "Do you want to explain why your story keeps moving while your records do not?" He opened his mouth, shut it, then forced a laugh that rang hollow. "Cherry-picked. Theater. You don't understand business." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful. You're mistaking smoke for breath." The silence thickened again, suffocating in its stillness. People weren't just watching anymore, they were witnessing collapse, piece by piece. Langford's hands clutched the chair's arms until his knuckles whitened. The accountant sat like stone, a human ledger no one could rewrite. On the clerk's desk, a sealed envelope waited, unopened, patient, ominous. Langford's eyes flicked toward it before he looked away too quickly. She let the room breathe in fragments, then finally spoke. "We'll pause. Then continue." The crowd rustled, voices buzzing, speculation sharp as static. The accountant closed his folio neatly. Langford stared at the envelope he pretended not to see. When quiet returned, her gaze fixed him again. "Mr. Langford," she said, almost gentle, "we're not finished." The envelope remained still, but its weight filled the room. The manila envelope lay on the clerk's desk like an unexploded device, plain but commanding. No one moved when she reached for it. She slid her thumb under the taped flap, tore it cleanly, and drew out a sheaf of papers bound with a brass fastener. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each one magnified by the silence that had fallen over the room. For the record, she said, voice even, these are emails obtained from Mr. Langford's personal account pursuant to a lawful warrant. They have been preserved in full chain of custody. Phones shifted in laps, half hidden, screens glowing faintly. The crowd leaned in unconsciously, hundreds of bodies tilting toward the thin stack of paper as though gravity had changed. She opened to a flagged page. The sound of a single sheet sliding over another carried across the benches. She read, from M. Langford. To C. Hale. Subject, account timing. Quote, I'll hide this payment through another account. He's an old fool, he'll never notice. End quote. The reaction was instant. A low boom of gasps, followed by laughter that rose, collided, and broke into shouts. Someone in the front row slapped his thigh and whispered harshly, that's it. Another hissed, game over. The bailiff raised his hand, voice like a whip, order. But the noise had already carved itself into the air. Langford stood so suddenly his chair clattered backward. He pointed at the documents, his face blotched with red. Fabrication, he shouted. Anyone can type an email. You think I wrote that? It's a circus trick. He shoved at the binder in front of him, scattering pages across the floor. His gold watch flashed as his arm jerked. She didn't blink. Second message, she said, turning to another tab. Her voice was quiet, but the silence that followed made every word sharp. From M. Langford, to outside counsel. Subject, settlement line. Quote, we can move recognition if needed. I'll label it, advance, and true up in Q2 if anyone checks. End quote. The gallery erupted again, this time not in shock but disbelief bordering on amusement. Nervous chuckles slipped into laughter, the kind that feeds on itself. A few clapped before the bailiff's glare killed it. Someone whispered, he admitted it in writing, and the phrase rippled through the room like a chain reaction. Langford jabbed a finger toward the witness stand, then at her, then at nothing. Fraud. Lies. This is a kangaroo court. I'll take this to federal court, a real court. I'll bury all of you in appeals. His voice cracked on the last word. He bent to grab the scattered papers, then hurled them again. They skidded across the polished floor in a useless fan. Her tone stayed calm, almost conversational. Mr. Langford, you are welcome to imagine better venues. But you've carried the evidence with you. It arrived the moment you pressed send. Laughter bubbled again, this time steadier, mixed with muttered disbelief. The accountant sat motionless, his hands folded, eyes lowered. He looked less like a man savoring victory than one marking an entry in a ledger, factual, final. She read one more. From M. Langford. To C. Hale. Quote, keep the memo internal. I'll find an old vendor account. Don't overthink it. End quote. Her eyes lifted. Mr. Hale, does this align with the draft entry you refuse to approve? It does, he said firmly. Langford's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words no longer arrived. His hands hovered uselessly above the table, uncertain whether to strike or to surrender. The room caught every tremor in his fingers, every twitch of his jaw. He tried once more. Fake, he said hoarsely. All of it. But the force was gone. Her reply came quiet but edged, I enjoy waiting for people to bury themselves. You've been thorough with the shovel. The room broke into low laughter, half disbelief, half catharsis. People leaned back at last, shoulders loosening, eyes glittering with the sense of watching something irreversible. Even those who had come skeptical now felt it, the tide had turned and would not reverse. She stacked the emails, pressed the metal clasp shut on the envelope, and rested her palm flat on it. Metadata confirms the origin of these messages, she said. They were sent from your device, through your private server, at the times indicated. Copies are available for counsel review. Langford slumped into his chair. His chest rose and fell heavily, his lips working around words that never formed. For the first time, he looked less like a man untouchable and more like someone who had simply run out of road. The gallery murmured as one body, "That's it. He's finished. He wrote it himself." The cruelty of crowds wasn't loud, but it was complete. The energy had shifted. She leaned back, eyes steady. "We will move to findings shortly." Phones were held tighter now, not for filming but for steadiness. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue, startled by her own tears. The accountant exhaled for the first time in minutes. Langford sat pale, staring at the sealed envelope as though it might open itself and eat him whole. "Any further objections, Mr. Langford?" she asked. A pause. His lips moved. The word came out small, "No." The silence that followed was thicker than the uproar had been. It felt final. She nodded once. "Then we proceed." The room had shifted from spectacle to gravity. Papers no longer mattered, neither did the restless hum of phones tucked under benches. All eyes followed her hands as she gathered the documents into a precise stack, squared the edges, and laid them flat. The sound of paper aligning was louder than any of Langford's shouts had been. For a moment, she simply looked at them. The gallery held its breath, sensing the pause was not delay but wait. Even the bailiff stood still, shoulders tight, waiting for the words that everyone knew were next. She spoke without raising her voice. "Based on the testimony, the records, and the communications entered into evidence, Mr. Langford, you owe your former partner $150,000. Plus costs incurred." It wasn't a flourish. It was a sentence, clean and sharp, a scalpel cutting away the last of his defenses. The reaction was immediate and physical. Applause burst like a fuse had been lit. Hands slapped together, shouts rose, a few people even stood in their seats. The bailiff barked once for order but didn't push too hard. The verdict had already become the crowd's possession. For the first time all day, their energy wasn't speculative, it was conclusion. Langford didn't rise. He sat, pale as dust, his hands trembling against the arms of his chair. The gold watch gleamed, absurd in its brightness, a relic of confidence now hollow. His mouth worked silently, shaping words that refused to arrive. She leaned forward, folding her hands atop the stack of papers, eyes locked on him. "Money," she said, slow and deliberate, "buys many things. But not honesty. And never respect." A breath. "Here, you have lost both." Her words landed heavier than the judgment itself. The applause stuttered, then faded into a quiet more profound than before. People turned their heads, watching not her but him, the man who had strutted in certain of invincibility, now reduced to stillness. His shoulders sagged. His lips trembled. For the first time, he looked small. The gavel struck. One hard, final crack. The echo carried through the room, flattening every stray whisper. And then, silence. The silence of a man who had always filled spaces with noise suddenly finding himself voiceless. The silence of a crowd that had come for entertainment but left with something closer to justice. The silence of respect, not for him, but for the line that had been drawn in front of him, a line he could never cross again. Langford rose at last, unsteady, clutching the table to steady his legs. The watch ticked on, indifferent, as he turned toward the door. For a heartbeat, the crowd didn't jeer, didn't laugh, they simply watched. And in that gaze, he shrank further, his figure swallowed by the weight of his own undoing. She stacked the papers one last time and set them aside. Her work was finished. The lesson remained.